What would you do if the woman standing in traffic court looked a judge in the eye, smirked, and said, "My husband is the governor, so this ends now," only for the judge to calmly reply, "Good. Let's hear what he has to say." Drop a comment telling us what you think the governor did the second that phone went on speaker, because this story starts with arrogance and ends in a way nobody in that courtroom would ever forget. Like this video, if you believe power should never be above justice. Hit that subscribe button if you love courtroom stories where the truth doesn't just come out, it explodes. Share this with someone who needs to see what real dignity under pressure looks like. By 9:14 on the rainy morning of Tuesday, October 17, 2023, Providence Municipal Courtroom 2 already felt too small for the number of people packed inside. Wet umbrellas dripped onto tan tile. Bailiffs moved with that practiced, silent efficiency that only happens in courtrooms where emotion has become a daily, weather pattern. The old brass clock above the side door ticked louder than usual. At the far end of the room, behind polished wood and a stack of neatly arranged files, Judge Caprio adjusted his reading glasses and called the next case. Case number TR 234418, Commonwealth of Rhode Island versus Danielle Mercer. The woman who stepped forward did not look nervous. She looked expensive. Danielle Mercer was 38, tall, poised, and dressed in a camel Burberry trench over a cream silk blouse, black tailored slacks, and pointed Christian Louboutin heels that clicked sharply against the courtroom floor. A gold Cartier love bracelet caught the fluorescent light when she brushed a strand of chestnut hair behind one ear. Her handbag, a structured black St. Laurent tote, was placed gently on the defense table like it belonged there more than anybody else did. Even before she spoke, people in the gallery noticed what she wanted them to notice: wealth, confidence, rank. But it was the way she looked at everyone else that said the rest. Beneath the surface polish, Danielle carried the kind of certainty that comes from never being told no for very long. The clerk read the charges in a flat voice: failure to stop after causing property damage, driving through a temporary pedestrian barrier on Waterman Street at approximately 6:42 p.m. on August 29, ignoring police instruction to remain on scene, reckless operation in a marked detour zone set up because of a utility trench collapse, civil penalties, restitution review, and consideration of license suspension. A murmur moved through the gallery. This was not a parking ticket. This was not one of those 5-minute cases where somebody pleads hardship and gets a reduced fine. Danielle folded her arms and leaned slightly onto one hip. There has clearly been a mistake. Judge Caprio looked down at the file, then up at her. Calm, steady, almost grandfatherly. "Mrs. Mercer, mistakes happen. That's why we review the facts." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Then this should be quick." In the second row sat a woman named Elena Ruiz, age 42, wearing pale blue scrubs under a charcoal coat. She had worked the overnight shift at Rhode Island Hospital and had come straight to court without going home. Beside her sat her 12-year-old son Mateo in a Navy school sweatshirt, his sneakers swinging an inch above the floor. On Elena's other side was her younger brother Louis, a city road crew supervisor with a healing cut above his left eyebrow. 2 rows back sat Officer Nolan Pierce, the Providence police officer who had responded that evening, his body cam footage already flagged in the case file. Near the aisle sat a man in a dark green utility jacket, right wrist braced, jaw set tight. His name was Terrence Hall, 49, public works contractor. He had been struck by a collapsing barrier Danielle's SUV had pushed into him. Danielle either didn't notice them or pretended not to. Judge Caprio asked the standard opening question: "How do you wish to respond to the charges?" "With context," she said. The tone made a few heads turn. Judge Caprio nodded once, "Then give me context." Danielle inhaled slowly as if burdened by having to explain herself to ordinary people. "I was driving home from a policy dinner at the Biltmore. It was raining. Signage was confusing. There were workers everywhere, some of them yelling contradictory instructions. I was frightened. My windshield was obscured. I made a judgment call to keep moving because I did not feel safe. Elena Ruiz shut her eyes. Officer Pierce lowered his chin. Judge Caprio didn't react, and after your vehicle struck the barrier. Danielle's expression hardened. I did not strike a person. Mrs. Mercer, the judge said gently, that is not the question I asked. A hush settled over the room. That line alone could have lived online for weeks. You could feel it. One of those clean, sharp courtroom moments people clip and replay because. Use the power isn't in the volume, it's in the precision. Like this video, if you believe the truth often reveals itself in the exact question someone refuses to answer. Danielle pursed her lips. I continued until I felt secure enough to stop. Officer Pierce shifted in his seat. Judge Caprio glanced toward him, then back to Danielle. According to the report, you stopped 3 blocks later after an officer followed with lights activated. I stopped when it was appropriate. After being pursued. After I understood I was being pursued. The clerk stopped writing for half a second and looked up. Even court staff could feel the temperature rising. There are people who lie because they're scared. And there are people who lie because they believe language can outrun reality. Danielle Mercer was still betting on the second kind. Judge Caprio lifted a photograph from the file. This is your vehicle. He angled it toward her. A white 2022 Range Rover autobiography, front grille glistening with rain, left bumper cracked, a strip of orange construction mesh tangled beneath the chassis. Yes. And this damage occurred how? She shrugged, I assume from a barrier. Terrence Hall let out a bitter breath through his nose. Judge Caprio turned a page. Not from the metal crowd control stanchion that struck Mr. Hall's arm when your vehicle pushed through the work zone. Danielle's jaw tightened. Again, I did not hit him. You displaced the object that hit him. I had no way of knowing that. This time, the murmur was louder. Everyone in the room knew what she was doing, not denying harm, just trying to stand 1 legal inch outside of responsibility. It was the kind of distinction that sounds clever right up until someone starts listing the names of the people who bled for it. Judge Caprio looked toward the gallery. Mr. Hall, would you stand, please? Terrence stood carefully. He was broad-shouldered, with thinning hair and the posture of a man who'd spent decades lifting things heavier than he should have. He raised his braced wrist slightly. Can you tell the court what happened? The judge asked. Terrence swallowed. We had the lane blocked because the pavement sank around a water main repair. We had cones, flashing boards, and a temporary pedestrian channel leading people around the trench. It wasn't pretty because of the storm, but it was visible. I was moving a barrier back into place because some guy in a Honda tried to squeeze through. Then I heard an engine rev. Loud. I looked up, and that SUV came at the opening like the road belonged to her. Danielle laughed softly under her breath. Judge Caprio heard it. So did everyone else. Terrence did not look at her. The barrier clipped my arm when it spun. I went down on 1 knee. My radio hit the pavement. Elena's kid was right there on the sidewalk. If Lewis hadn't pulled him back, that barrier would have taken the boy in the legs. Mateo's fingers wrapped around his mother's sleeve. Danielle shook her head. That is dramatic. Elena stood before anyone asked her to. Her face was exhausted in the specific way only hospital workers look exhausted. Not sleepy. Drained. Dramatic is telling your child to move because a car is coming where no car should be. Dramatic is hearing metal scrape concrete and thinking, for 1 second my son is about to die in front of me. A collective silence dropped over the room so fast it felt physical. Danielle looked away. Judge Caprio turned to Elena. Please sit, ma'am, thank you. Then he faced Danielle again. Mrs. Mercer, did you know there was a child in that pedestrian lane? No. Did you know there were workers there? Yes. Did you see Officer Pierce motioning for you to stop? I saw a person waving. That landed badly. You could hear it in the gallery, the offended little exhales, the whisper of disbelief, the shift of coats against wooden benches. Officer Nolan Pierce stood when called. He was 31, clean-cut and wearing the dark blue of a patrol officer who had been up too long. I was in full reflective rain gear, he said. Marked cruiser, lights on, flashlight in left hand. I was about 15 feet from the front of her vehicle. I made eye contact through the windshield. She rolled forward anyway. Danielle snapped, "That is false." Pierce didn't raise his voice. "Ma'am, my body cam was on." That changed something. Not outside, not yet. Danielle's posture stayed composed, but inside, somewhere behind the eyes, a calculation began. Judge Caprio noticed. So did the people who spend enough time in court to recognize the first crack before the break. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever watched confidence disappear the second evidence enters the room. Judge Caprio asked the clerk to cue the footage. The monitor mounted near the witness stand flickered to life, with the kind of grainy realism that always feels more powerful than polished video. Rain streaked across the lens. Sirens bounced red and blue across. Slick asphalt. Officer Pierce's breathing was audible as he approached the construction detour. The camera caught orange mesh, flashing road lights, city workers in neon vests, Alina holding Mateo by the shoulder, and then the white Range Rover nosing past a barricade while Pierce shouted, "Ma'am, stop your vehicle now." There it was, undeniable, not a blur, not confusion. The SUV paused. Danielle's face was visible through the windshield for half a second. She looked directly toward the officer. Then the vehicle surged. There was a horrible scrape. Terrence shouted. Mateo screamed. Lewis lunged, grabbing the back of the boy's hoodie and yanking him sideways. A barrier whipped through frame like a metal gate caught in a storm. Pierce ran after the SUV yelling, "Stop! Stop the car!" The footage ended 3 blocks later with Danielle stepping out under the awning of a closed pharmacy, one hand over her hair to shield from rain, saying the first thing everyone in the courtroom heard all over again through the speaker. "Do you know who my husband is?" No one moved. The line hung there like smoke. In person, arrogance can feel fleeting, small, human. On video, under fluorescent courtroom lights, with children and workers in frame, it becomes immortal. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Mrs. Mercer, is that your voice?" Danielle's answer was softer this time. "Yes." "Did you ask the officer if he knew who your husband was?" "Yes." "Why?" No answer. "Why?" he repeated. This time she said, "I was upset." Pierce's mouth tightened. Lewis stared at the floor. Alina held Mateo close, though the boy hadn't taken his eyes off Danielle since the screen went dark. Judge Caprio let the silence work. He never rushed silence. That was part of why people watched him. He understood something flashy judges never do. A courtroom becomes powerful not when the judge speaks most, but when the truth finally has enough room to breathe. Then Danielle did the thing that would change the entire morning. She lifted her chin and said, "My husband is Governor Adrian Mercer. I would like to call him." Even the court reporter looked up at that. One woman in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another person muttered, "She didn't." Yes, she did. There are moments when a room knows it has crossed into story. Not law, not procedure. Story. The kind people repeat at dinner tables for years. The kind that goes from local courthouse gossip to the most talked-about clip in the state. Judge Caprio's expression did not change. "And why would you like to call him?" "Because this is becoming a spectacle," Danielle said, "and I think some perspective from the governor's office might help." You could actually hear the insult in the phrase "the governor's office," not her husband, Not Adrian, not someone who might care about what happened. An office, a lever, a force she assumed could still bend the room. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly. Then, in a tone so even that people leaned forward to hear it better, he said, "Mrs. Mercer, in this courtroom, perspective is always welcome. Threats are not. If you'd like to call your husband, you may. Put him on speaker." For 1 second, Danielle looked surprised. Maybe she expected resistance. Maybe she expected the judge to recoil, or the clerk to object, or the room to recognize hierarchy and shrink. Instead, the judge handed hierarchy a chair and invited it to testify. Like this video, if you believe that confidence backed by truth is stronger than any title. Danielle reached into her tote with fingers that were still steady then. She took out a gold iPhone, unlocked it, and scrolled. The contact name on the screen read Adrian. A little red heart sat beside it. The detail would later matter to people. Because power is one thing. But intimacy, marriage, loyalty, that's where stories get complicated. She pressed call. Once, twice, 3 times. The room was silent except for the faint speaker buzz and the rain tapping the courthouse windows. Then a male voice answered, clear, deep, slightly distorted by the phone speaker. "Danielle, I'm in a briefing." Her face softened instantly. "Adrian, I'm in court and there's an issue." Judge Caprio spoke before she could say more. "Good morning, Governor Mercer. This is Judge Caprio. Your wife has asked for your perspective on an active traffic matter. You are on speaker in open court." What happened next was not what Danielle expected. It was not what the gallery expected. It was not what Officer Pierce expected, or Elena, or Terrence, or even the court clerk, who later said she could feel the whole room brace for interference. Instead, after a short, stunned pause, the governor said, "Judge, then I'll keep this brief. If my wife endangered anyone, she should be treated like every other driver." You could hear breaths catch all at once. Danielle turned white. "Adrian," she hissed, no longer polished, "you don't understand what." He cut in. "No, Danielle, I understand exactly enough." A man in the back whispered, "Wow." The governor continued, and now there was no mistaking the steel in his voice. "If there's body cam, if there are witnesses, if a child was put at risk, then my title has no place in that courtroom. None. Judge, I apologize if my office or my name has created any pressure." Judge Caprio answered quietly, "Your words honor the office, Governor." Danielle's hand began to shake. Not wildly, just enough for the phone to tremble against her palm. "Adrian," she said again, lower now, "please don't do this here." But there was something in the governor's silence before he spoke next, something heavier than anger, something closer to grief. "I'm not doing this here," he said. "You did." The gallery was perfectly still. Some moments don't feel real as they happen. They feel too exact, too cinematic, too devastating in their symmetry. The woman who had tried to use public power as a shield was now listening to that same power refuse her in front of everyone she'd tried to silence. And then it got worse. Because the governor didn't stop there. "Judge," he said, "with respect, there may be information relevant to this court that I was not aware of until last night. If you have not yet reviewed the victim impact submissions, I suggest you do so." Danielle stared at the phone like it had betrayed her. Judge Caprio's eyes sharpened. "We have reviewed preliminary submissions. Are you referring to additional material?" "Yes." Danielle whispered. "Adrian, stop." He kept going. "This morning, before my budget meeting, my chief counsel informed me that 2 letters were delivered to my office. One was from a nurse. The other was from the daughter of the injured contractor. They were addressed to me personally. They stated that my wife had not only left the scene but later used state security staff to inquire whether the report could be handled quietly." The courtroom erupted into gasps. The bailiff stepped forward immediately. Order. Judge Caprio lifted one hand, and the room fell back into shocked quiet. Danielle's mouth opened, but no words came out. That was the revelation that changed everything. Not just reckless driving, not just entitlement, possible abuse of official channels after the fact. Judge Caprio's voice cooled by several degrees. Mrs. Mercer, did you or did you not contact any state personnel regarding this matter? She said nothing. Did you? I asked someone what the process was. Officer Pierce stared at her in disbelief. The judge asked, whom did you ask? Danielle swallowed. A scheduler in Adrian's office. It was informal. From the gallery, Lewis let out a broken laugh that sounded more wounded than amused. Informal. Must be nice. Judge Caprio turned to the clerk. Mark this matter for possible referral regarding interference concerns, and I want those letters entered if properly authenticated. Danielle whispered, this is insane. No, the judge said, and the courtroom seemed to lean in because everyone knew a quote was coming, one of those lines that would outlive the day. What's insane is how often people mistake privilege for innocence. No one wrote that down fast enough. People would remember it anyway. Share this with someone who still thinks status can rewrite consequences. Danielle's mask was slipping now. The tight composure was gone. Her breathing had gone shallow. A flush crept up her neck. Her eyes moved from the judge to the gallery to the phone to the body cam monitor as if every object in the room had suddenly become hostile. The governor spoke again. Judge, I don't want special notice. I don't want a courtesy call. I don't want anyone protecting me from embarrassment. If my wife has harmed people, let the record be complete. Danielle blinked rapidly. Why are you humiliating me? Adrian's answer came like a door closing. Humiliation is what happens when pride meets evidence. That was another line people would repeat for weeks. Judge Caprio looked toward the gallery. Ms. Ruiz, Mr. Hall, if the letters were yours, I'd like to hear from you directly. Elena stood first. She reached into her tote and unfolded a sheet of paper creased from being opened and closed too many times. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I wrote because I'm tired, she said. Not just physically tired. Tired of explaining to my son why some people think the rules are for traffic and taxes and school forms and all the things ordinary people worry about, but not for them. Mateo has asthma. He had already spent 3 days in the pediatric ER that month. We were walking around the work zone because I had promised him hot chocolate from that little place near Thayer after his follow-up appointment. When the SUV came through, he froze. He always freezes when he's scared. I've been teaching him not to. Lewis pulled him back. If he hadn't, I don't know what I'd be saying in this courtroom today. Mateo looked down, embarrassed by attention, then back up at Judge Caprio. Elena continued, and the room listened the way people do when truth stops sounding performative and starts sounding expensive. I didn't write to ruin anyone. I wrote because no child should learn that power means your fear doesn't count. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. Thank you. Then Terrence Hall stood with difficulty, his braced hand pressed to the table. My daughter Ava wrote the other letter, he said. She's 19, CCRI student, wants to be a physical therapist. She wrote because I got home that night trying to act like I was okay, and I was. My wrist was fractured in 2 places. I lost 3 weeks of work. That matters when your union sick time is thin and your wife's already picking up doubles at the diner. But that's not even the whole thing. I kept replaying the sound of that barrier flying. I kept thinking about that little boy. I'd rather break both arms than watch a kid get hit because somebody couldn't be bothered to stop. Danielle closed her eyes. And for the first time, maybe the first real time, she wasn't fighting the courtroom anymore. She was fighting herself. Judge Caprio turned to the phone. Governor Mercer, are you still there? Yes. I appreciate your candor. I should have known sooner, the governor said. That line carried an entirely different weight. Because now people weren't just watching a case. They were watching a marriage split open under fluorescent light, not because of scandal alone, but because one person had spent so long believing their shared life could cushion consequences that she forgot the other person still had a conscience. Danielle spoke so quietly the microphone almost missed it. "You think I'm a monster?" From the speaker came a long exhale. "No," Adrian said. "I think you've become someone who forgot other people are real." It was brutal, and somehow gentler than calling her evil, because it left room for change, but only if she could bear to hear it. Judge Caprio ended the speaker portion after confirming the governor was available later if procedural questions arose. Danielle lowered the phone slowly, like it weighed 20 pounds. The clerk resumed writing. The room breathed again. Rain hammered the windows. Somewhere in the hall, another case number was called, another ordinary crisis proceeding beyond those doors. But inside Courtroom 2, everyone knew they were already in the middle of something millions would watch if it ever got out. And still there was more. Because the court had not yet seen the surveillance footage from the pharmacy, awning 3 blocks away. Officer Pierce handed the disc to the clerk. "Submitted this morning." Judge Caprio raised a brow. "Let's view it." Danielle's head snapped up. "What surveillance footage?" Pierce answered without looking at her. "From the stop location." The monitor flickered again. This angle was cleaner, higher, black and white but sharp enough to show body language in painful detail. The Range Rover pulled in under the pharmacy awning at 6:47 p.m. Pierce approached from the driver's side, rain sheeting across the scene. Danielle stepped out, furious, pointing past him with her phone in hand. Audio was limited, but the footage time-stamped every movement. At 6:48:13, she jabbed a finger toward the officer's chest. At 6:48:20, she appeared to say something. The body cam audio, synced over the surveillance clip, filled in the words. "You have no idea who you're talking to." The courtroom went still again. There's a difference between isolated arrogance and repeated arrogance. The first can be excused as panic. The second starts to look like character. The clip continued. Pierce asked for license and registration. Danielle tossed her keys onto the hood. Then came the moment that changed the emotional geometry of the room. A small figure entered frame from the sidewalk. Matteo. Elena gasped. "Matteo, no." He had followed with his uncle and mother a few minutes later, wanting to identify the car. In the video, the boy stopped several yards away and just stared at the SUV. Danielle turned, saw him, and for one brief second the expression on her face changed. It wasn't enough to erase what came before. But it was there. Shock. As if seeing the child made the incident real in a way metal barriers and workers had not. She lowered her hand. She said on audio now, softer than anything else heard from her all morning, "Was that the boy?" "Yes, ma'am," Officer Pierce replied on the video. Danielle took one step back. Then, instead of asking if he was okay, instead of apologizing, instead of walking toward the terrified child, she turned away and made her call. The gallery groaned almost in unison. Matteo himself stared at the screen with a strange, thoughtful sadness, like he was too young to understand power but old enough to recognize disappointment. Judge Caprio let the clip end. Then he asked the question no one else had thought to ask. "Mrs. Mercer, when you saw the child, what did you feel?" That question landed differently. It did not accuse, it demanded humanity. Danielle stared at the defense table. "I felt." She stopped. Judge Caprio waited. The courtroom waited. The answer mattered more than the charge at this point. "I felt afraid," she said at last. A few people shifted, skeptical. The judge asked, "Afraid of what?" Her face crumpled just slightly. "Of what I had done." There it was. Not a full confession, but the first honest sentence. Judge Caprio leaned forward. Then why didn't you say that to the officer? She laughed once, and it broke halfway through into something raw and embarrassing. Because I didn't know how. No one moved. You could feel the room recalibrating. Schadenfreude had carried them this far. The satisfaction of watching arrogance get cornered. But now empathy knocked at the door, unwanted and undeniable. Because collapse, when it finally comes, rarely looks glamorous. It looks like a person realizing in public that every shield they trusted has become evidence against them. Judge Caprio spoke in that same steady voice. Pride is expensive, Mrs. Mercer. Usually the innocent pay first. That was quote number 4, and maybe the sharpest of them all. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever seen one sentence tell the whole truth of a case. The prosecutor requested a brief recess to organize the supplemental material. Judge Caprio granted 10 minutes. The gavel struck once. People rose. Voices returned in whispers. Wet shoes squeaked on tile. Danielle remained standing at the table as if unsure whether her legs would cooperate. Her lawyer, Martin Keene, who had until then said almost nothing, leaned in and murmured urgently. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, immaculate in a navy canali suit, and wearing the expression of a man whose morning had gone far worse than billed. "Did you contact the governor's scheduler?" he asked under his breath. Danielle nodded once. Keene closed his eyes. "Danielle, it wasn't like that. It is always like that when it lands in a courtroom." Across the aisle, Elena opened a juice box for Matteo. Lewis spoke quietly to Terrence. Officer Pierce reviewed his notes. The bailiff stood near the rail, pretending not to notice any of it. And then something small happened that changed the trajectory of the case more than the speakerphone moment itself. Matteo got up. Elena caught his sleeve. "Where are you going?" He whispered something she clearly didn't want to hear. She hesitated. Lewis shook his head, but Matteo gently pulled free and walked across the aisle toward Danielle. Half the room watched without breathing. Danielle saw him coming and straightened instinctively, like she expected anger, maybe accusation, maybe the simple, clean brutality of a child saying, "You scared me." Instead, Matteo stopped 3 feet away and asked, in a voice so quiet the room had to listen harder, "Did you really not see me?" The question was devastating because it wasn't legal. It was personal. It was every victim question stripped of rhetoric. "Do you know I exist?" Danielle looked at him, really looked, and whatever rehearsed defense she still had left could not survive the sight of a 12-year-old boy waiting for an answer. "I saw you too late," she whispered. Matteo nodded like he had expected that. "Okay." Then he said the one sentence no adult in that room was prepared for. "My mom says when people are scared, they tell the truth with their face before they tell it with their mouth." Danielle's eyes filled instantly. Matteo walked back to his seat. Nobody clapped. This wasn't television, but you could feel that the emotional center of the whole room had moved. When court resumed, the letters were read into the record in part. Elena's was simple and devastating. Avahal's was angrier, written in the blunt, scorching style of a daughter who had watched her father ice a swollen wrist with his left hand because pride wouldn't let him ask for help. She wrote that public workers are treated like scenery until someone wealthy hits the scenery and learns it has a name. Judge Caprio asked the prosecution whether there was evidence that state staff had attempted to influence the report. The answer was careful. No evidence of successful interference, but a scheduler in the governor's office had placed a call to a liaison at the Department of Transportation asking whether the matter was sensitive. The liaison declined to engage. Logs confirmed the contact. That was enough to darken the room all over again. Danielle didn't deny it now. "I asked if someone could explain what would happen," she said. "I was panicking." The judge nodded. Panicking after the fact does not erase choices made in the moment. Then came the next twist. Martin Keene stood and requested permission for his client to make a statement before disposition. Judge Caprio granted it. Danielle stepped away from the table slightly. She did not look elegant now. She looked tired. The carefully controlled poise was gone. Her hair had loosened. A streak of mascara shadowed one lower lid. The expensive clothes no longer protected her from anything. That, too, mattered, because justice is not merely punishing the proud. Sometimes it's removing the costume and discovering whether there's a person underneath worth saving. She began badly. "I am not who this is making me look like." A low murmur met that sentence, because everyone had heard versions of it before. Judge Caprio said nothing. Danielle took a breath and started again. "That sounded wrong. I know what the footage shows. I know what I said. I know how I sounded. And I know that if I were sitting in that gallery hearing a woman talk that way after nearly hurting a child, I would hate her too." Alina's face tightened, but she kept listening. Danielle looked toward Terrence first. "Mr. Hall, I am sorry for your injury." Then to Alina and Mateo. "Ms. Ruiz, Mateo, I am sorry for frightening you." She stopped there. The apology was technically correct but incomplete, too polished, too safely phrased, frightening you, as though fear were the only damage, as though power had not been abused. Judge Caprio knew it, so did everybody else. "Mrs. Mercer," he said quietly, "you're close, keep going." And that was when the breakthrough came. Danielle pressed her fingertips to her eyes for a second. When she lowered her hand, she was crying openly now, not prettily, not strategically. "I said my husband's title because I thought it would protect me from shame. I drove through because I was angry that my route was blocked. I told myself I was late, tired, frustrated, wet, inconvenienced. I made my inconvenience more important than other people's safety. Then when I realized I could have hurt someone, I tried to outrun that feeling by becoming bigger, louder, harder. I wanted the world to bend before I had to." No one interrupted. "I did ask someone in Adrian's office what could be done," she continued. "I wasn't trying to write a bribe or erase a file, but I was absolutely trying to get comfort from power instead of accountability from the truth, and that is wrong. That was better. Not perfect, but real." And then she did something few arrogant people ever do in public. She became specific. "Mr. Hall, the report said you missed 18 workdays. Ms. Ruiz, your letter said Mateo has panic episodes in traffic now. Officer Pierce, I'm sorry I disrespected you while you were doing your job. Judge, I'm sorry for trying to bring politics into your courtroom. And Adrian," her voice cracked on her husband's name, "I'm sorry for asking your office to carry what I should have carried myself." The courtroom sat in a profound, aching stillness. There it was. The breaking point. But a breaking point by itself is not redemption. Redemption requires consequence. Judge Caprio reviewed the penalties one by one, with the gravity of a man who understood that mercy without structure is sentiment, and punishment without purpose is waste. He found Danielle responsible on the traffic and reckless operation counts based on the evidence. He imposed a substantial fine, ordered full restitution for Terrence Hall's lost wages and medical expenses pending final documentation, required a 90-day license suspension, with limited hardship review only after completion of a certified driver accountability program and a community road safety course. Ordered 40 hours of direct community service, not symbolic charity, but service coordinated through the city's street maintenance and pedestrian safety initiative. And because the case had raised broader public concerns, he recommended a formal ethics review of any use of official staff in personal legal matters. Danielle bowed her head with each condition, as though hearing nails driven one by one into the shape of a new life. Then Judge Caprio added something no one expected. Mrs. Mercer, he said, I am also giving you an opportunity. She looked up. Once a month for 6 months, I want written proof, not from your lawyer but from the program supervisor and the community service director, detailing whether you showed up, participated, and listened. Not whether you were seen, whether you listened. The gallery shifted. This wasn't just sentencing. This was moral supervision. Judge Caprio continued, some people walk out of court punished. A few walk out instructed. Which one you become is up to you. Quote number 5. And perhaps the most important of the day. Like this video, if you believe the best judges don't just punish behavior, they confront character. Danielle nodded through tears. I understand. Judge Caprio looked at Mateo. Young man, do you have anything you'd like to say before we conclude? Alina tensed, but Mateo stood. He swallowed hard. I just want her to stop using the scary voice. Danielle pressed a hand to her mouth. Mateo continued, because when adults use that voice, everybody else has to shrink, and I don't think Apple should have to shrink. There are times when children summarize entire social systems better than any expert. Judge Caprio smiled sadly. That is very wise. Danielle turned to Mateo. I will stop. Court adjourned at 11:06 a.m., but no one rushed out. That alone told you what the morning had meant. In the hallway, local reporters who had not known this case mattered suddenly started making phone calls. A court officer quietly told another, if that speakerphone exchange gets out, it'll be everywhere by tonight. Someone from the clerk's office said they had never seen a gallery stay seated through an adjournment like that. Alina hugged Mateo so tightly he squirmed. Terrence shook Officer Pierce's hand. Martin Keene collected files with the stunned movements of a man already calculating the news cycle. Danielle stood near a column beneath the framed portraits, alone for a moment in a crowd full of witnesses. No aides, no husband, no security detail, just a woman in a Burberry trench, mascara streaked, staring at the courthouse floor. Then Alina Ruiz did something nobody predicted. She walked over. Louis noticed and started to follow, but she raised a hand to stop him. Danielle looked up, bracing. Alina said, I don't forgive you yet. Danielle nodded once. You shouldn't. But I also don't want Mateo growing up believing people never change. Alina's eyes were red but steady. So if you mean what you said in there, prove it where no cameras are. That line hit even harder because it came without performance. Danielle whispered, I will try. Alina answered, try is a weak word, do it. Then she walked away. That should have been the end. For most competitor scripts, it would be. Speakerphone humiliation, judges' quotes, sentence, tears fade out. But real emotional payoff doesn't come from the fall. It comes from what someone does after nobody is watching. And that is where this story became unforgettable. 3 weeks later, on November 8, 2023, a volunteer coordinator named Marnie Ellis nearly dropped her clipboard when Danielle Mercer showed up at 7:28 a.m. to the city pedestrian safety warehouse on Allens Avenue wearing a plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, work gloves, and no makeup. She drove herself in a borrowed silver Toyota Camry because her license was suspended. No state vehicle, no press, no escort. Marnie would later say, I thought she'd send a check and vanish. Instead, she asked where the cones were. The first day was brutal. Not because anyone yelled at her. Because nobody cared who she was. Road crews were already loading battered orange barrels onto flatbeds. Coffee steamed from paper cups. Forklifts beeped in reverse. The air smelled like wet rope, diesel, and salt. Terrence Hall was there, wrists still healing, supervising inventory. When he saw Danielle, his jaw locked. Marnie approached carefully. You can pair with the sign repair team. Terrence cut in. No, pair her with me. The warehouse went quiet. Danielle met his eyes. If that's appropriate. Terrence answered, "We'll find out." That day he had her hauling bent metal frames, sorting damaged reflector panels, and logging locations where faded crosswalk signs had to be replaced before winter. No one softened instructions. No one rescued her from awkwardness. When rain started, Terrence kept working. So did she. By noon her sneakers were soaked and her hands had blistered under the gloves. Around 1:15 p.m., Terrence finally asked, "You ever stood in traffic with cars ignoring your safety vest?" "No," Danielle said. He pointed to the lane they were closing beside a school crossing. "Then today's your day." It would have been easy to write this part cheaply, to make Terrence cruel, to make Danielle heroic, but truth, even dramatized truth, is more interesting when neither side gets an easy script. Terrence wasn't cruel. He was honest. And Danielle wasn't heroic. She was late to humility and paying retail. By the third service day she had learned the names of the crew: Jada Monroe, 44, sign technician and grandmother of 5; Benny Costa, 26, joker, welder, recovering addict with 6 years sober; Harold Kim, 61, retired Marine and part-time crossing audit volunteer. These were the people she once would have seen only as orange vests and inconvenience. Now they had stories. Jada had lost a cousin to a distracted driver at a bus stop. Benny still flinched when tires screeched because of the crash that nearly killed him at 19. Harold kept a folded photo in his wallet of his granddaughter at age 7 in a neon crossing guard sash because she thought he was the sidewalk captain. Every detour had a reason. Every cone had a name behind it. Every delay somebody wealthy cursed under their breath had probably begun with someone else bleeding on asphalt. Drop a comment telling us if you think real accountability starts only when people are forced to meet the lives they once ignored. December brought another TW. Danielle wrote her first required monthly report, but Judge Caprio rejected it. Not because it was false, because it sounded like a press release. It spoke of lessons learned, public trust, civic appreciation, and personal growth. Elegant phrasing, empty calories. He sent back a one-line note through the clerk: "Less image, more truth." That note hit harder than the sentence, because she realized she was still narrating herself instead of confronting herself. So she wrote again. This time she described the smell of wet asphalt near a school zone at dawn, the way drivers looked through workers like glass, the embarrassment of recognizing how often she used irritation to justify disregard. She wrote that Terrence Hall had not smiled at her once in 4 weeks and that she no longer believed he owed her warmth. She wrote that she had begun therapy because panic was not the root of my conduct. Entitlement was, and entitlement always dresses itself as urgency. Judge Caprio accepted that report. By January 2024, the original courtroom footage had indeed gone viral after a local station obtained the hearing through public request. Clips of the speakerphone exchange flooded every platform. Commentators split into predictable camps. Some praised the governor for refusing favoritism. Some accused him of sacrificing his wife to save his image. Others focused on Judge Caprio's lines, cutting them over dramatic music and headlines about power, privilege, and consequences. One clip titled, "Humiliation is what happens when pride meets evidence," crossed 6 million views in 4 days. But the most replayed moment wasn't the governor. It was Mateo saying, "I don't think people should have to shrink." That child had turned a courtroom drama into a cultural statement. At school, teachers recognized him. Alina hated that. She wanted privacy, not symbolism. Mateo himself seemed only dimly aware of what had happened, but he began speaking more openly in therapy about the incident, and his panic around crosswalks slowly eased. Danielle saw none of that directly. Not at first. Because redemption, if it means anything, has to tolerate distance. Meanwhile, the governor's mansion became its own battlefield of consequence. Reporters camped outside. Pundits speculated about the Mercers' marriage. Adrian Mercer's approval rating briefly dipped, then recovered when ethics investigators confirmed he had neither instructed nor approved any intervention. Danielle moved out of the governor's residence in February and into a rented townhouse on the east side. No scandalous affair. No criminal conspiracy. Just the quieter, sadder collapse that happens when trust is worn down by character revealed under pressure. One night in March, after a 12-hour shift repainting worn school zone stripes, Danielle sat in her car outside the townhouse and listened to a voicemail from Adrian she had not yet answered. His tone was tired, stripped of public polish. "I'm not calling to reopen the hearing," he said. "I'm calling because Marnie Ellis spoke to my office for unrelated reasons and mentioned you've been showing up before sunrise. For what it's worth, I'm glad. But Danielle, change is not the performance of shame. It's what you do after shame loses its audience." She replayed that line 3 times. Because it was true. Because it hurt. Because it was maybe the first kind thing he had said to her in months. The unexpected twist around 7,000 words in this story was not scandal. It was mercy. Not from the system. From the people she hurt. In early April, during her 5th month of service, Danielle and Terrence were assigned to help at a weekend pedestrian safety fair in Roger Williams Park. Booths lined the path. There were bike helmet fittings, crossing demonstrations, a memorial board for traffic victims, and a city display showing how fast a car covers distance at 30 versus 40 miles an hour. Children ran between tables clutching balloons. Parents drank burnt coffee from paper cups. Wind whipped through the tents. Near noon, Alina arrived with Mateo. Danielle saw them and froze. Terrence noticed. "Keep stacking pamphlets," he muttered. But Mateo had already seen her. He walked over slowly, not fearful this time, just cautious. Alina followed, shoulders tight. Danielle spoke first. "You don't have to come over here." Mateo shrugged. "I wanted to." That somehow made it harder. He looked at the table Danielle had been arranging. Reflective backpack tags, brochures on driver-yielding laws, little toy traffic lights for kids. "Do you work here now?" She almost smiled. "Not exactly." Terrence snorted. Mateo picked up a reflective tag and held it to the light. "These are cool." Alina finally spoke. "His therapist suggested we come." Danielle nodded. "I'm glad." The silence that followed could have gone in 100 directions. Sentimental, awkward, bitter, performative. Instead, Alina looked at the volunteer log on the table where Danielle's name had been signed in every week for months. She saw the mud on Danielle's jeans, the faded gloves in her back pocket, the exhaustion in her face that expensive concealer could not have hidden even if she'd tried. And she understood something people in comment sections never do. Punishment ends. Work doesn't. "You've lost weight," Alina said. Danielle gave a small, startled laugh. "Turns out moving traffic signs at 6 a.m. is not a spa treatment." For the first time, Alina almost smiled back. Then Mateo asked, "Do you still use the scary voice?" Danielle went still. "No, I'm trying very hard not to." Mateo considered that. "Okay." Then he did something extraordinary. He held out the reflective tag. "You can give this one to me, so then it counts." Danielle took it with trembling fingers and clipped it to his backpack strap. She had to crouch slightly to do it. Up close she could see the faint freckles across his nose, the way one lace on his right sneaker was coming undone, the total uncomplicated trust children sometimes offer in tiny installments. When she stood, Alina said, "This is not forgiveness." "I know. It's a beginning." Danielle's eyes filled. "Thank you." Terrence, who had been pretending not to listen, cleared his throat and handed Mateo a second tag. "Take one for your uncle, too. He drives like a maniac." Lewis, standing a few yards away with a coffee, shouted, "I heard that." People laughed. And just like that, the room inside the story changed again. Not because harm was erased, because humanity returned. That moment never made the viral clips. No judge, no governor, no speakerphone, no quotable devastation. Just a boy, a backpack tag, and the smallest possible bridge laid over a terrible day. But ask anyone who was there, and they'll tell you that was the real climax. By May, Danielle completed all 6 monthly reviews. Marnie Ellis's final letter to the court stated, Mrs. Mercer completed 58 hours rather than the required 40. She requested additional shifts without fanfare. She accepted difficult assignments, complied with directions from all supervisors, and engaged respectfully with city workers and members of the public. Most importantly, she demonstrated an observable shift from self-reference to service. Terrence submitted his own note too. It was only 3 sentences long. I don't excuse what she did, I don't forget it either, but by the end she stopped acting like the work was beneath her. That matters. Judge Caprio read both letters in chambers before the follow-up hearing on May 28, 2024. The courtroom was less crowded this time, but not empty. People remembered. A few reporters returned. Alina came. So did Mateo, taller somehow. Adrian Mercer did not attend, though a brief written statement from his office was entered confirming he had no request regarding the matter and appreciated the court's fair administration. Danielle stood before the bench in a navy sweater and simple black flats. No designer armor, no performative sorrow, just a woman who looked like she had been carrying bags of sand uphill for months and understood she deserved the climb. Judge Caprio reviewed the reports. You completed more than required. Yes, Your Honor. You began therapy. Yes. You have had no further violations. No, sir. He studied her for a moment. What did you learn? Danielle answered without notes. That most of my worst decisions happened long before I got in that car. They happened in smaller moments over years when I let status shorten my patience, when I treated inconvenience like injury, when I assumed people serving the public were interruptions to my day instead of the reason the day functioned at all. The court punished one incident, but the incident was built from habits. No one in the room moved. She continued, I also learned that apology is not a speech. It's repetition, showing up, being uncomfortable, not asking for credit, not asking injured people to heal quickly so you can feel better. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. And what do you owe the people you frightened? Danielle looked toward Alina, then Mateo, then Terrence. A life that does not repeat itself. That line, simple as it was, may have been the truest thing she ever said. The judge lifted his glasses. Mrs. Mercer, the law can suspend a license and impose a fine. It cannot manufacture character. That is slower work. Based on the record before me, I believe you have begun it. He reinstated her driving privileges under full compliance, preserved the ethics referral record, and closed the matter with one final statement that would be quoted almost as widely as the first hearing. Justice is not satisfied when the powerful fall. It is satisfied when the truth stands, the harmed are seen, and the future is made safer than the past. If that doesn't deserve a comment, I don't know what does. Drop a comment telling us whether you believe people who abuse power can truly change, or whether some lines should never be crossed twice. After the hearing, the hallway scene was quieter than before. No chaos, no frenzy, just the heavy, strange calm that follows a chapter finally finishing. Alina approached Danielle again. This time she held out an envelope. What's this? Danielle asked. A copy of the letter I originally wrote, Alina said, and a new one. Danielle blinked. Why? Because if you're serious about not repeating yourself, you should keep both. The first is who you were in my life. The second is who you became after. Danielle opened the second letter later that night at her townhouse kitchen table. The room was dim except for the pendant light over the counter. Rain tapped softly against the window, almost the same sound as the day of court. She unfolded the page. It read, "I still remember the fear. I probably always will. But I also remember that you stayed in the hard place when leaving would have been easier. Mateo says you don't use the scary voice anymore. I hope that's true everywhere, not just where people can see. If it is, then let this be the proof that accountability can build something punishment alone cannot." Danielle cried over that letter longer than she had cried in the courtroom. Because forgiveness, when partial and honest, is harder to receive than condemnation. Condemnation is simple. Mercy asks something back. Months later, in September 2024, a local nonprofit launched a pedestrian safety campaign featuring road workers, nurses, school crossing volunteers, and families affected by traffic negligence. At the edge of the campaign website, almost unnoticed, was a small donor acknowledgement. Danielle Mercer, private contribution. No press release. No speech. No photos. By then she was no longer living in the governor's world. Her marriage to Adrian remained separated, though not publicly finalized. Some said they were attending counseling. Others said the distance was permanent. That part stayed private, as it should have. Not every wound belongs online. What did go public, however, was more meaningful. Danielle joined a year-round civic education initiative speaking to newly licensed teen drivers and adult defensive driving classes. Not as a celebrity, not as a victim, as a warning. In one community center basement in Cranston, sitting on a folding chair beside a projector screen, she told a room of 16-year-olds, "The most dangerous sentence I ever said was not to a judge. It was the sentence I said silently to myself long before that day. I'm too important to wait." No one forgot it. That's the thing about transformation when it's real. It stops sounding dramatic and starts sounding useful. And Judge Caprio, he was asked about the case months later during a local interview. He never sensationalized it, never mocked Danielle, never claimed credit for her change. He simply said, "A courtroom should be one of the last places in society where titles become smaller than consequences." Classic Caprio. Simple, wise, built to last. As for Mateo, he kept the reflective tag on his backpack until it cracked at the edges. Alina says he became obsessed with crosswalk design after the incident, drew safer intersections in the margins of his homework, asked why schools didn't have raised flashing crossings near every bus stop. By spring 2025, he had won honorable mention in a youth civic essay contest for a piece titled "People Shouldn't Have to Shrink." Think about that for a second. A terrifying moment on a rainy street could have taught a child that power always wins. Instead, because a judge stayed calm, a governor told the truth, victims spoke clearly, and a guilty woman finally stopped hiding behind her own name, that child learned something better. He learned that dignity can survive contact with power. He learned that being seen matters. He learned that adults can fail badly and still choose not to fail forever. And that may be the most viral lesson of all. Like this video, if you believe justice is strongest when it protects ordinary people without forgetting their humanity, share this with someone who needs a reminder that titles fade, but character speaks on speakerphone forever. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories where the courtroom becomes the place people finally meet themselves. Here's what stays with people long after the clip stops circulating. Not the Burberry coat, not the governor's title, not even the speakerphone humiliation, powerful as it was. What stays is the sound of a judge refusing to flinch, the sight of a frightened boy asking the simplest possible question, and the slow, uncomfortable proof that consequences can do more than crush a person. They can uncover one. That day began with a woman convinced influence could save her. It ended with a courtroom proving influence means nothing if truth is already in the room. Months later, what remained was not scandal, it was structure. Restitution paid, service completed, habits confronted, fear numb. Ed, a child steadier at crosswalks, a worker seen, a nurse heard, a governor reminded that public honor begins at home, and one former defendant learning, one sunrise shift at a time, that respect is not what you demand when you're comfortable. It's how you behave when you finally are not. Maybe that's why this story hits so hard, because most people will never stand in front of a judge with cameras waiting. But everyone knows the temptation to use status, money, charm, family, anger, or urgency to make the world bend around their worst impulse. Everyone knows what it feels like to choose pride 1 second too fast. The difference between a cautionary tale and a redemptive one is what happens after evidence strips away excuses. So let us know in the comments. If you had been Judge Caprio, would you have shown mercy after the apology, or would you have come down even harder? And if you were Alina, could you ever begin to forgive someone who scared your child like that? Subscribe if you want the next story, because the one coming up might be even more unbelievable. A billionaire laughed during sentencing until the victim's father stood up and said 6 words that froze the entire courtroom. You do not want to miss that one. And remember this, because it's the line beneath every story like this. Power can open a phone call, but only character can survive speakerphone.